He's got one foot in the frying pan and one in the pressure cooker. Believe me, as a bowler, I know that right about now, your bladder feels like an overstuffed vacuum cleaner bag, and your butt is kind of like an about-to-explode bratwurst.
Hey, do you mind? I wasn't talking when you were bowling.
Was I talking out loud?
Welcome to Munson's at the Movies. My name is Kyle. I will be your host. I'm here once again with the rest of the Munsons. Want to give them a wide berth.
He's what is called a born loser. A real Munson.
And talk a little bit about what's going on in their worlds. Case, you're up first this week, man.
You know, not a whole lot has changed from the last week on my end. Just trying to keep moving through. And in Texas, we keep opening things up a little bit more every week.
We know you've made a couple trips to the movie theater and you're still alive, so we're proud of you.
I have. I've seen 2 movies at the theater. That's exciting.
Don't become a statistic, Case.
Living dangerously. Rigby, speaking of living dangerously.
No, I think I'm living much more safely back in Iowa compared to New York.
I knew that would fuck you up. So,
Mom and Dad's house ain't dangerous.
Mom and Dad's house is 1,000 times safer than my shitbox apartment. That's for sure. Same deal. Nothing's really changed since 2 weeks ago. Things are starting to really open up here. Tomorrow, all of the restaurants and bars will be at full capacity again. I think a little too early, if I'm being honest. Knock on wood, we're still about flat, which is a good sign.
Yeah, could you imagine if corn was a spreader?
Oh.
You guys would be fucked.
We'd be screwed. If corn and pigs could spread this thing, we'd be screwed.
Give it time. Give it time.
Give it time. Exactly.
I don't know if you know, but viruses can mutate. Speaking of mutation, James.
Still living in a constant state of fear and anxiety. Only socializing I've done at this point is I went golfing twice, and because of how terrible I am at golf, I was still observing social distancing laws. Other than that, I've been trapped inside my house this whole time.
Would you say you were observing social distancing from you and the cup?
No, me, people, the fairway, the cup, everything involved. I was nowhere close to another soul. Don't worry about that.
Warren, dad life.
Glad to be back. I can't believe it's been 4 weeks since last recorded one of these things. Felt like 2 days ago. I've actually, dad life's been great, but I've been spending a lot of time outside, just mowing the yard, doing uber dad stuff right now, and it's really showing my lack of sports. I'm working on patterns in the grass, and I even found myself raking mulch infield dirt the other day for 2 hours. Shit's getting real. Shit's getting real here, guys.
Warren's treating his yard like it's a professional MLB ballpark. He's got patterns in the grass.
I've got cameras all over this place too.
You are officially Frank the Tank, Warren. Gonna make a nice little trip to Home Depot this Saturday.
I don't know if I have time.
Well, on my end, boys, I'm 2 weeks away from moving to Baltimore.
Nice.
So I'm getting ramped up. Yeah, I'm about to sign a contract here probably tonight. Hopefully, we finally got the addended contract back. But yeah, moving out to Baltimore in 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Wait, did you find a job?
Not yet. I'm still employed through July 31st, but
okay.
Been finally found a good place on the southwest side of Baltimore. And it's in Halethorpe.
To Hickman, no joke, you could probably play for the Orioles.
You're probably not wrong at this point.
At least throw an inning of relief or something. You could definitely help them out.
I've been pitching every weekend, man. I'm probably going low 80s right now. If you locate that well, you might be able to get by, right?
All that said, just Trey Mancini get better. That's terrible with the cancer. I hope he gets better.
True that. Life's going to change a little bit, so my months in life is going to get pretty busy over the next 2 weeks. So the next episode, we'll see how much prep I can do. I'll squeeze in as much as I can. Birthdays, June 18th. Warren, what do we got?
This is not a great birthday, but for one who it is a birthday, Carol Kane, Oscar nominee, had to put that out there. She's from Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, The Princess Bride, and the Gerard Butler, Jennifer Aniston classic, The Bounty Hunter.
Eagerly anticipating the third one you always drop.
Yep.
Carol Kane. Someone else go.
Ghost of Christmas Present in Scrooge, right?
Correct. Her Oscar nominee is from 1975.
Oh boy.
Okay, that helps.
That helps a lot.
That helps Rigby. He knows exactly who and
He's
what
like,
it
oh,
was.
of course, yeah.
I don't think I know what movie she was nominated for.
She's 68.
I was going to say 66.
Give me 64.
Jeez, I think she's older than that. Am I wrong? I'm going to go 70.
Yeah, you're wrong. She's 68. James knows
Holy
it.
shit.
Oh,
Nice.
Bitches.
Swish, buddy.
So if she was nominated in 75, Jesus, she was young then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Warren, if you wouldn't have given us that year, I probably would have ended up being off by about 20 years.
I figure I'd do you a little bit of a favor. So, yeah, and that's all the birthdays. So happy birthday to Carol. That's
Happy
it.
birthday,
Nobody
Carol.
else.
Happy birthday. All right, so we had some actors for this episode to consider. The wheel has spoken, and although we were considering Amy Adams, Brenda Fricker, Bird Lady, Jeff Daniels, and James Franco. I'm just kind of hoping, because I really appreciated John Rigby's impersonation of an Irish accent last week, to just see what Brenda Fricker would have done if we would have covered her. There's still time. But those names notwithstanding, we are covering Djimon Hounsou. He seems to be pretty popular amongst their online crowd. It's going to be a fun one.
I agree. I liked how James Franco got like little to no love as well. As I was like, damn. It's like I did not expect people to inadvertently dunk on him like that.
Dude, people were all about the Jeff Daniels life, and no one said a peep about Amy Adams, which was extremely surprising.
I know, that was my first choice too. That's why
I was waiting for you to say something. I was like, James is usually the guy that's all about Amy Adams.
I don't want to, I don't want to weigh the polls here, because the wheel decides. That's important.
This is true. Djimon Hounsou, so we're covering this week, and James has got some actor trivia. And let's see if you can stump us.
We're going to do 2 truths and a lie, and one of those lies is going to be a fact about a cast member of the Fast and Furious franchise. So do with that information what you will. Kyle's been pretty good at this because he usually finds the same interesting facts that I do online. So I have to work pretty hard to screw him over here. So I'm going to try my best. All right. Fact number 1. He's one of 15 actors who's played characters in both the DC and Marvel universe, totaling 6 different movies. Fact number 2. He speaks 5 different languages. Fact number 3. He was homeless from the age of 13 to 18 until he was found by a fashion photographer on the street.
I think James is fiddling with some on us on this one, because I know he speaks a couple languages. I don't know about 5. But he could.
This is what it's come to. I gotta get tricky.
I'm gonna say B is the second one. Number 2 is false. I bet it's like 3 instead of 5.
I'm gonna say the first one is a lie. The DC and Marvel one.
I'm gonna say it's also with numbers, and I think it's number 1 as well. I don't think it's 15 people, but he's definitely crossed over in Shazam, Aquaman, and then as Korath.
I'm gonna say that Jason Statham is actually the one that knows all the languages, and we just don't realize how linguistically gifted that guy is.
Okay, so the one you guys all didn't choose, which is definitely the most specific and awesome fact, is that he was homeless from the age of 13 to 18 in France, and he didn't actually get a steady income until he was spotted by a fashion photographer while he was on the street, who asked him if he'd be interested in potentially modeling. And a few years later, his modeling career had taken off and he moved to LA. So that is a pretty inspiring story. He moved
He was sporting derelict at the time.
I mean, 5 years on the street is unbelievable. Another fact that is true is he actually does, in fact, speak 5 different languages. He's originally from Benin, Africa, and they actually have 3 different dialects that they speak in that country specifically, as it borders kind of on the Congo as well. And then on top of that, he speaks English and French. And he actually is one of 15 actors who's been in both DC and Marvel movies. But instead of 6 movies, he's actually only been in 5.
Called it.
Idris Elba's actually been in 6, and he is the star of Fast and the Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw.
Nice.
Nice. Hemdell, yeah, good call.
Another interesting fact, I found that super cool, but there was just no way you would ever think this wasn't true. The country he's from, Benin in Africa, is the birthplace of voodoo. Djimon Hounsou didn't figure out until he was actually doing research for a documentary that his name translates to strong blood born in the shrine of voodoo. He figured that out.
What?
2 years ago while he was doing a documentary. I can't think of like a more direct tie to voodoo than that. It's such a badass name.
That's so cool, man.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great research, James. Case, snapshot box office history. Tell us about his impact there.
I have 18 movies that I listed, and 9 of them have budgets that are over $100 million, and that shocked me.
Ooh.
Here are the 2 that stood out to me that really surprised me. And I guess watching them and thinking about them, I didn't think they would be $100 million budgets. The first one is Gladiator.
Mm-hmm.
But as I thought about it, do you guys think that's probably a visual effects thing?
Yeah, the CGI of Rome.
That was back when CGI just had like an endless price tag on it because no one knew what they were doing.
Yeah, they weren't allowed to film in the Colosseum.
Couldn't get that permit, you know?
They couldn't get the permits, that's right. The other one that surprised me was Blood Diamond, and that was a $100 million budget movie.
I could see that because of all the action scenes that are like massive action scenes. They're not just like intimate. It's like 1,000 people war scenes.
And that's kind of what I was thinking too, right, James? But those, that's really the only thing that stands out, in his box office because, he's in some massive movies, but they're not surprising anybody. I mean, nobody's surprised that Guardians of the Galaxy profited $603 million.
The Marvel movies have ruined how we look at box office for other movies at this point. Now it's like if a movie doesn't make like $200 million, I'm like, wow, that's a failure. But that's just because of Marvel's like tainted our views.
Before we get into his film and TV career, James offered up some really good context for how he got his start, being homeless, living in France, not knowing English, moving to LA, and getting his start there. Before he got into film and television, he was in a bunch of music videos. So he was in music videos for Paula Abdul, Madonna, Janet Jackson, and Vogue. So if you dig those music videos out of the vault of YouTube, and you look hard enough, you're going to find Djimon in some of those videos. And he talks about that a lot in his interviews that he does on the circuits. He really hit the scene in the film and TV side in 1990. Between 90 and 96, he was in a lot of smaller projects. He was in movies like Without You, I'm Nothing, Unlawful Entry, Killing Zoe, Stargate. Stargate's not a small movie, but small part, and in a variety of video shorts. It wasn't until 1997 that he got his first big film break, and that is the movie Amistad. And Warren is going to take us through this one.
Djimon did Amistad and another movie, Ill-Gotten Gains, in the same year, and both are centered on the slave trade. I do believe Ill-Gotten Gains came out before Amistad did, but Amistad's just got a lot more name recognition. It's a Spielberg movie. He filmed that one in between Jurassic Park, Lost World, and Saving Private Ryan. So a lot on his plate. And 77 critics, 79 audience. So really close. But it being a 1997 movie, it only has 60 critic rankings on it and over 51,000 audience. The audience is definitely more accurate. Star-studded cast. Djimon Hounsou, I think he kills it in the movie. He's not even the top build on it, but you got Matthew McConaughey, Morgan Freeman, Anthony Hopkins, who was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting for 5 minutes, and 4 minutes of it is one speech, but it's a good speech. Stellan Skarsgård's in it. Chiwetel Ejiofor makes an appearance as a 19-year-old, his first movie.
Wow.
No kidding.
Spielberg picked him out. He is an ensign in the Navy who is the translator between the Mende tribe and Matthew McConaughey and everybody else. So it was really cool seeing him and just kind of how his career has evolved. And he'll be an awesome one to eventually do. I watched the movie earlier today, and I really can't think of a better time for this to be my first viewing of the movie. So the story, it centers on a group of Africans from the Mende tribe in Sierra Leone. They're taken from their homes and transported to Cuba on a boat called the La Amistad. Djimon, his character, Cinque, gets out of his bonds. He unlocks all the other chains, and they they mutiny. They take over the vessel. It was a Spanish ship, and they were trying to get them to take them back to Africa, and they ended up steering the ship alongside the eastern U.S., and the U.S. Navy commandeers the vessel because they believe it's a bunch of slaves who had basically mutinied, and they had to go back. But there's a law that the slave trade is no longer legal, and so the only slaves in the U.S. are born slaves. The whole thing becomes this court drama where Matthew McConaughey is working with Morgan Freeman and Stellan Skarsgård, who are abolitionists, and they're trying to prove that they are free people and therefore are not slaves or property of anybody else. Anthony Hopkins plays John Quincy Adams. The whole thing, I mean, there's a lot of history in it, and it's crazy to go back and read the actual story on it and the court case. And so the initial court case is all these people are like, oh, these guys are my property. These guys are this. It finally gets decided in the court that they are not property and they're free. And then politicians step in because they're afraid that they're going to lose the presidency because the South would be pissed if you were to free slaves. There's a lot of creepy parallels to current events, and it's unbelievable that I know this was 97, so you're still at that time you're 5 years after Rodney King stuff, but you're still this is 23 years ago. It couldn't be any more important to watch now. I think when it came out, I don't think the U.S. was ready for this movie. You can hear all you want on U.S. history, but there's some of the graphic scenes in the movie.
It's pretty raw.
I was unbelievable. I was sick to my stomach. They just say, oh, it was miserable. People were stacked on top of each other. And sure, they show that, but they don't show chaining people together and tying them to a bunch of rocks and throwing them off because they don't have enough food, or women with their newborn babies just jumping off to not have to deal with it anymore. I mean, it is terrible, 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 terrible. Some of the critics, with the 77, some of them have some valid points when they gave it some lower scores. They're upset on how it's almost been whitewashed to a point where the attention is off the Mende people, but how the lawyers and political figures are trying to justify their actions and stuff like that. And so I can see that, but I think in some of the pivotal scenes with Anthony Hopkins' soliloquy at the end, which kind of pushes everything over the top, listening to what he says is, a very timeless speech. You could play that at any point in history. It's going to be true. I think they could have paid, a little bit more attention to the Mende tribe and all those people. I was really blown away by the movie. I really enjoyed it. I think aside from some camera work here or there, but I mean, it was 23 years ago. And I think if the movie came out today, I think it's instant Oscar quality for everything. And this was only nominated for 4. One was for Anthony Hopkins, one was for John Williams doing music, and 2 other ones. I think it was way ahead of its time.
He got a Golden Globe nom for his role in the movie, so he did get some love.
He was incredible. I mean, he was speaking the various Benin dialects through it, and very little of it was subtitled, and it was done through an interpreter, which was Chiwetel Ejiofor. That was the only way that you could really tell what he was doing. Everything else had to be just his emotion, his posture, all of this stuff. And so he basically said 3 words that you could understand the entire movie, and he was still far and away the most passionate person you cared about in the entire movie. I mean, there was tears, there were smiles, there was anger, there was violence, it was everything. He did it all. It was, for him, it was incredible. And it pisses me off that Hopkins got the nomination for it, because he had such a small part. Any recognition in that movie should have came from Djimon.
I think part of what plays into that is, there's very much a political side to the Academy Awards where very rarely are they going to give it to a newcomer. And with this being Djimon's first major role, him happening to steal the scene is going to get overshadowed by the historically loved and classic actor Anthony Hopkins. So it's like, wow, yeah, that new guy's really good, but this is Anthony Hopkins. So
right.
And so that's like the move they made here.
It was the most watched Oscars that year. That was Titanic. That was As Good as It Gets. It was Good Will Hunting, LA Confidential.
That's a big year. Yep.
They had to throw out their best bet to get anything, and that's really unfortunate because he was incredible in it.
And I think it's important to note with Ill-Gotten Gains and Amistad, 2 early roles, but 2 big roles for him. He's built a career as an anti-slavery humanitarian, and a lot of it comes from his work on those films. And we'll mention here in a minute, he was a narrator for a project called The Middle Passage, and so he's continued to do work there. Gives you an idea of what he's been doing off the screen too. That it wasn't just a role; it's something he's passionate about.
Yeah.
98 to 2002, he was in Deep Rising as Vivo.
Modern day pirates try to rob a cruise ship, and turns out the cruise ship is being stalked by like a underwater creature. And Djimon plays one of the pirates who tries to rob the cruise ship.
Between 99 and 2000, he did some TV work. He was on ER. He was on one episode of The Wild Thornberrys. 2000, we hit Gladiator, and his role as Juba, which was a huge movie and is definitely one of the roles that is most associated with him as an actor.
This is one of those movies that I don't know if I've ever heard anyone or met anyone who says, I don't like Gladiator, right? It's every person I've ever met is like, oh, that's like the movie that doesn't matter where it is when it's on TV. I'm watching to the end of it.
Guys, guess what?
Oh, no.
I like this movie.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
I'm going to be so upset.
But it's bullshit. This movie has 77% on Rotten Tomatoes. 77.
I don't understand how.
Are you not entertained?
It's
somebody probably came back like in the later was like Russell Crowe did some dumb shit, and so I don't like it anymore.
Similar to the previous role, he is a slave that's being sold, and he's Russell Crowe's like right-hand man, and they like immediately kind of bond in the fact that both of them know how to fight, and they can kind of fight their way out of this. But he's like the more calming presence, where Russell Crowe is the hothead of this, and so it's interesting to see him take that position when in Amistad he's super emotional, and this one he's a little bit more reserved.
2002, he's in Deadweight, and also in 2002, he's in a movie called The Four Feathers. He plays Abu Fatma. It's a Heath Ledger project, and he plays a huge role in that movie. And so I think just important to note, early in his career like this, there were some big-time actors. He plays kind of like a local tribal leader who is helping Heath Ledger's character, who is a defector from the British Army, to essentially avenge the situation. He plays a pretty big role in that. I was surprised. I thought it was just going to be a minor role considering some of the others earlier on in his career. Also in 2002, we're going to hit a little bit of a Munson's choice. So for context, Rigby was supposed to cover Largest Critic Gap, and unfortunately the movies that qualified for that he's pretty small role in a lot of those. So we gave Rigby the opportunity to pick a movie, and he decided to pick In America, which is a movie that he was nominated for an Oscar for.
I believe was his first Oscar nomination of 2. In America, I had heard about this movie years ago. I had never seen it, but it's a 2003 movie from writer-director Jim Sheridan, his other previous movies both featured Daniel Day-Lewis, My Left Foot and In the Name of the Father. So if you guys have seen that, if you've seen those, they're both Irish, emotional, melodramatic type movies. And this is kind of the same way, but this one was a delight. I'm really glad I got to watch it. The film revolves around the Sullivan family. They're a family of 4 who immigrate from Ireland to New York in the early 2000s. Some reviews I read said that it took place in the early 80s, which I don't think it did, because there were camcorders, there were cars that didn't look like the 80s. The clothing was the 80s, but they never say the time period, but I just assumed it was the early 2000s. Anyway, the film is narrated by the oldest Sullivan daughter. There's 2 daughters, a wife and a husband in the family. Right away, the plot feels pretty similar because there's countless amounts of movies where immigrants, immigrate to the United States and they try to find a better life and they have a hard time doing it. When I turned the TV on, I was like, oh my God, this is just another one of those, movies that I've seen probably 100 times. The reason why this one is different is because the acting feels so real. Mm-hmm. And the two performances that are awesome, I guess the three performances, the two daughters are both sisters in real life.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Their acting did not feel like acting. It was very, very natural. They are, a shining light in the movie. That helped make it feel so real. The plot of the movie is basically this family immigrates to the United States. They move into this dumpy apartment in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan, which is where I used to live as of a month ago. While they're moving in, they hear screaming from an apartment below them that turns out to be the apartment of Mateo, played by Djimon. Djimon plays this character named Mateo, and he is introduced as a deranged, intense artist who paints these elaborate paintings in his apartment. And when he messes up, he screams throughout the day and night, and it scares the whole apartment building. There's even a painted sign on his door that says, "Keep away." So right away, you kind of see him as this commanding character who no one really wants to mess with. Eventually, a few months go by, and you see the Sullivan family, through trials and tribulations, eventually start to like their time in New York. They're poor. They steal air conditioners off the streets. It's very similar sort of themes to what you see in a lot of immigrant movies. On Halloween night, the two daughters go to play trick-or-treat on Mateo's door. There is where we meet the real Mateo. His character started out as a brutal, intense-like figure that we are usually used to seeing Djimon play, sort of a no-nonsense, big, tough guy in a lot of movies before this. But when we meet him for the first time, he immediately becomes endearing and sentimental, and he devotes his time and attention to the Sullivan family. I personally love this role for Djimon because, as I mentioned, I think it was so different than what we're used to seeing him in movies. From Amistad to Gladiator, he played a guy who, he played a slave. He played someone with a rough life. He played someone who didn't have a lot of emotions other than just being filled with rage and filled with a lot of turmoil, which makes sense, obviously, coming from a slave standpoint. He showed off a lot of range in this. There's some great scenes of him and the family, particularly Johnny, who plays the father of the family, where they really there's a scene where Johnny thinks that he's having an affair, that Mateo's having an affair with Johnny's wife. Mm-hmm. And it's super intense. There's a twist in the movie. I guess during the middle of the film, you find out that Mateo is HIV positive, but that only seems to get him closer to the Sullivan family. And in most movies, you would think, or in real life, you would think that if you find out someone is HIV positive, you would, an apartment tenant that you would probably want to stay away from because you would just be scared of them. I think that's a natural human reaction.
Especially during whatever time period this was, where that was like the fear mongering that was going on at the time.
Right. And the cool thing about this movie is that it doesn't draw them apart. It draws them actually closer.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, he's really the hero of the movie because he passes away from HIV in the movie, but he donates a huge trust fund that he's been sitting on that is unknown to the viewer of the movie throughout the movie so far. And in the last 10 minutes, it's revealed that he's been sitting on this huge trust fund, and he gives it to the Sullivan family to live the rest of their life. So,
God, spoiler alert, Dick.
Comes with the territory.
I thought we were okay giving that one away just because it's really cool. It's a really cool movie, and I think critics saw that because he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this role, as I mentioned. He's probably in about 5 to 6 long scenes, and half of those he brings raw emotion. He cries in it. He yells. I mean, it's a really, really good performance. Something I was not really expecting of him. And so he's the brightest spot of the movie. I love the movie. I thought it was a really delightful film to watch. Loved his performance, and I was very fortunate to be able to watch it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome for the permission to watch that.
I echo your sentiments on it. I'd never seen it before, but for this podcast, I watched it. And initially when it started, I kind of rolled my eyes because I was like, oh my God, I've seen this kind of cliche trying to make it an America story before. And I was afraid it was going to kind of hit me over the head with whatever narrative it was about to use. And it's not that at all. It was like,
no, it's not.
Very refreshing how subtle it is and the points it's trying to get across. And kind of how nuanced they are, because it's not like if you try your hardest and do this, you could succeed. Like that's not at all what this American dream is. And it was cool to see.
By the end of the movie, they had learned to take their tough going in stride, basically, which I think is which I think is their American way. You know, obviously you're never going to be perfect. You got to roll with the punches. You got to keep getting back up and pull yourself up. And I thought that was the overall theme of the movie, and it was funny. I mean, the daughters are hilarious in it.
I like how the daughters are kind of oblivious to how dire the situation is.
They are, which is why I think that brings a comedic effect to it.
Especially since it's like the narrator's point of view, and like you're seeing this family like just holding on, and the daughter's like, and the apartment was really hot, and the dad's about to have a mental breakdown if they don't get an air conditioner or something.
All right, between 2003 2011, he's busy, so we're gonna fire through these. First and foremost, Biker Boys plays a character named Motherland.
Oh boy, yeah, Biker Boys. Oh man, it had such potential because it came out a few years after Furious, and I think that's probably why they made it, because they saw how successful Fast and Furious was. But it's a clunky movie. The acting is bad. I love Lawrence Fishburne. I like Derek Luke a lot too. I wasn't into it at all.
I watched this movie once, and I actually thought it was a parody, and I wasn't in the mood to watch a parody at that moment. So the next time I saw it on, I tuned into it. I was very excited to watch a comedy about a biker gang, and I found out that this movie was trying to be serious.
Yeah.
So
when are the jokes coming?
How does it compare to Wild Hog?
Way less Travolta.
It described itself as a Western biker gang movie.
He was in the original Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Creative Life in 2003. He was in a movie called Renegade in 2004. And I mentioned this particular film because he is in a grand total of 2 scenes. He gets scalped by some of the Native American folk that are in the movie. Yeah. But he's legitimately in 2 scenes. But when you watch the movie, the opening credits, he's the second name that's listed. So he is just there for star power. That's it.
Yeah. They're just trying to drive people to watch the movie.
And that's interesting that this early in his career, 2004, he's in a purely cosmetic role at this point in time, just to put his name on the opening credits. I think it's important to point that out early on.
Mm-hmm.
He's in 3 episodes of the show Alias, and then he's in Constantine as a character Midnight.
Constantine was and I know this sounds blasphemous at this point with how his career's kind of revitalized. This is when I just started completely roasting Keanu Reeves because this movie asked him to show no emotion at all the entire time and thought that was like a plot device.
Mm-hmm. Based on the graphic novel character, like it is a very no emotion, just like a huge cynic, but he's got all these like biblical ties and all that stuff. So I guess he kind of nailed that part. It probably would have been cooler to see somebody else in that role. Probably could have taken it up and over.
I thought Djimon did a good job in his role as Midnight, kind of a voodoo witch doctor who plays a pretty pivotal role in the plot of the movie, and he was really good in it.
That's what I like to hear. And it connects to what we talked about with his name. So that's good.
Yeah.
2005, he's in Beauty Shop. Also in 2005, he's in the Michael Bay epic The Island as Albert Laurent. I had seen this probably a decade ago, if not longer, and I rewatched it for the podcast, and let me tell you, 5 seconds in, it's a Michael Bay film. The bright neon lights, I feel like there was an explosion in the opening credits. He's pretty good in this. I mean, he's a mercenary that's hired to secure ScarJo and Ewan McGregor, and he has like a turn. The turn that he has is very... I think part of the criticism of the movie is that all of a sudden he becomes their defenders instead of the mercenary, and there's not a lot that is set that allows that to happen naturally. I think he does a pretty good job in that role itself. But that also leads into Blood Diamond. His character is Solomon Vandy, which was his other Oscar nomination, which is probably the biggest role I think people associate with him.
I just watched this for the first time for this podcast after when this movie first came out. Again, this was a time period in which when something looked like it was kind of Oscar bait, my brain would say, well, that's going to be boring. I don't want to be taught a lesson for 2 hours, and I wouldn't watch it. And so I finally watched this movie, and I think his performance was by far the standout performance in this movie. I think there are some scenes that are unnecessary and run a little long or don't really move the plot along. But every time that he's on screen, he takes it from like this action movie to like a true drama for every scene that he's in. He humanizes the situation, and then it gets back to like a big action movie.
He was nominated for that along with DiCaprio.
That movie had a huge audience disparity, 90% audience and 63 critic.
2008, he's Never Back Down.
When we talk about Serenity later, Serenity is a bad movie. Never Back Down is a bad movie. It's good
fun
to watch.
Absolutely.
It's fun.
Never Back Down is Karate Kid if it took place in the OC. And instead of karate, they just did like mixed martial arts. And you don't really need much more of a plot than that. Djimon plays the Mr. Miyagi role here and is the guy who trains the protagonist to becoming a better fighter. But the standout star of this, I still don't even know this dude's name.
Cam?
Cam, the bad guy.
Cam
That's a good bad guy.
He was. I think
Dude,
he does a really good job.
Guy. This movie's so corny, and then every time he's on screen, you're like, but I hate that fucking guy.
I hate that guy.
No,
he does a good job.
Cam was in the OC, so that makes perfect sense.
What makes sense why he was casted then?
Push. He plays Henry Carver, 2009.
Yeah. Push came after the Fantastic Four. It was Chris Evans kind of going in between Marvel properties, but he was playing kind of like these people. Him and Dakota Fanning have these superpowers, and they're being pursued by the government, and Djimon plays kind of the bad guy in it. And he wants to use the powers to with like a serum to create super soldiers.
A little bit of a prelude to some of his other Marvel work. He was in the animated miniseries of Black Panther as T'Challa.
And kind of continuing off of what I mentioned with Fantastic Four. So after the second one, the director was thinking about doing a third one and wanted to bring Djimon in as Black Panther in the Marvel Universe then. Good thing he didn't, because this Fantastic Four movie's fucking blew, and the newest iteration of it fucking blew.
They've never been good.
And Chadwick Boseman's fucking awesome as Black Panther, and so I'm glad they got him in when they did.
And then finally, he's in a movie called Elephant White. I'm not going to recommend that people go see it, but he plays a sniper in what I would call an off-brand Taken or You Were Never Really Here. I know, Rigby, you're not a huge fan of You Were Never Really Here. I think you just need to rewatch it. But it's a similar concept as the sniper assassin who's trying to avenge a bunch of girls who were taken into the sex slavery trade.
Hey, what if I wanted to hear Kevin Bacon do an Australian accent?
Oh my god. Yeah, his accent in that movie is so over the top awful, dude. It's terrible.
That sounds awesome.
You did Hollow Man. What are you doing with your life? But that brings us to 2011, his lowest critic score. So 2011 was just a rough year for him in terms of films. He was in a movie called Special Forces, which is a French film. It's got a 6.4 audience, 37 critic on IMDb, and on Rotten Tomatoes, it's a 52 audience, 15 critics. So on Rotten Tomatoes, it's bad. So it's a French film directed by a guy named Stéphane Ribajad. You guys ever heard of him?
No.
Nope.
No, you haven't, because he's directed a 52-minute TV movie and one episode of a show. He's mostly a producer.
Whose nephew is he that he was able to get Djimon Hounsou to star in his one movie? He's related to somebody who plays strings.
But he's not even really the biggest actor at the time. I would contend Diane Kruger was probably the bigger actor at the time in this one, because it's got two actors from Inglourious Basterds. It's got Diane Kruger, and it has Denis Ménochet. He played the guy who owned the farmhouse in Inglourious Basterds.
Oh, yeah, the beginning. The beginning, yep.
La Padie.
Dennis the Ménochet.
Yes, Denis the Ménochet.
I'm working on my dad jokes.
You're excelling, my friend.
Yeah.
I don't know. The movie is just extremely infuriating from the start. Kruger plays this character named Elsa. She's a French journalist who is in Pakistan. She's either in Pakistan or Afghanistan. She's covering the Taliban, essentially. And she's doing a story on a woman named Mina who was sold to a man while she was a child, when she was 12. The woman goes to meet with her and is like, yeah, the Taliban found out about me telling this story, so we can't do this anymore. She shows her face and she's like, yo, what are you doing showing your face? She's like, pretty much like, I'm going to die soon, so I just want you to see me. And Elsa, you would think she's in war-torn area in Taliban territory. As soon as her story is, it's pretty clear that she's going to be taken out, you would think, hey, it's time to leave. I'm probably in some physical danger, some physical jeopardy. The other journalist she's with, Eamon, is like, yeah, you need to leave. And she's, no, I can't leave her alone. I'm an idiot. I'm a dumbass. I'm going to stay here and try to help her. And not surprisingly, she gets kidnapped by the Taliban. because of the hit pieces she's written about them over the years.
Who could have seen that coming?
No one could have saw this coming at all. And by the way, there's no character development at all. They give you no background on these special forces, which is led by Djimon. They essentially are trying to exploit her to get on camera and, the usual Taliban thing that they do, right? The French government decided to send in these special forces, which are 6 soldiers led by Commander Kovacs, which is Djimon. They stumble upon her, they get in there, they take her, but then their escape plan is thwarted. Their choppers can't come in and take them out. So the rest of the movie is them essentially trying to get away from all these forces and this Taliban leader who is, his ego is all hurt and is trying to track them down even through the winter. All you need to know is there's a ton of death in this one. I mean, I think the reason the critic score is so low is because death is cared so meaningless. It's one of those movies too where like the 6 of them kill like 50 people each until they finally take a bullet in the arm that just scrapes them. One of those kind of action films. You're like, this isn't possible. These are well-trained dudes. I get it. But the dude who's a sniper is just running maybe 75 feet in front of them, in front of 25 guys who are all shooting. And they're just whizzing past his legs. And the dude would turn around every 5 seconds and take out 3 guys.
He's that good.
I guess. Maybe
That's a skill.
Maybe I just don't have it. It's got some cool like aerial camera shots, but the challenge is Djimon's wasted. He's good in the character, but you know nothing about his story, you know nothing about his life. So nothing inspires you, nothing gives you any emotional weight to the film. All you know is that he had a birthday because they're having a birthday party and he's got some significant other. You don't know names, you know nothing else. It's just the screenplay is just crappy and his performance is wasted and he's the only soldier who doesn't get shot. And at the end of the movie, a random rock slide pins his leg against a hill and he gets stuck there.
And that's the start of 127
I was going to say,
hours.
it's the prequel to 120.
So I'm hating it as I continue watching. I get to the third act. I'm hating it even more. And she eventually gets away, escapes. They get left behind because one dude gets shot in the leg and Djimon's leg is all fucked up. And she ends up finding the French forces. They come back and flying and they find them laying on the hill alive. So like that's the payoff you get when it's all said and done with a few artificial tears. So it's not a good movie. The critic score is well warranted. I'd probably give it in like the 35 to 40 range. It's not the worst movie I've ever seen, but it certainly isn't worth the audience score 50s and 60s. And that's Special Forces. Before we get the highest critic score between 2013 and 2014, he's in Baggage Claim, and he also plays Drago in How to Train Your Dragon 2. And if you've seen How to Train Your Dragon 2, Drago's the heavy in that one, the bad guy. I didn't realize it was him playing the voice actor, but once I looked into it, I was like, yeah, that character was pretty good in the movie. So some voice acting work that he did. But that leads us to his highest critic score, which is Guardians of the Galaxy 2014, and James has got this one.
Guardians of the Galaxy is one of the better Marvel movies. I would say most people you speak to will say that of the 23 that have come out, this one is in their top 4. I think that's a fair say. After that, I'll probably get to preference. But quick synopsis on it is Chris Pratt's character, his name's Peter Quill. He gets kidnapped when he's like 8 years, maybe 10 years old by aliens. And he is now, traveling the galaxy and kind of salvaging anything he can find or steal to just pawn for money. So he kind of just comes across like a dumpy kind of criminal. He eventually comes across this random orb that he doesn't really know what it is, but finds out pretty quickly that it's highly desired by multiple supervillains. One of them is Korath, which is played by Djimon, and then Ronan and Thanos, who are all tied into the other Marvel universe. And what they want is they want to somehow use this orb to commit genocide on like a global universal level. When they end up stealing it from Pratt, he partners up with a group of space criminals to save the galaxy. That is like the basic level of synopsis. What I would say actually makes this movie great, though, is that at this time, like superhero movies were really trying to like up the emotional stakes and the seriousness of the consequences of each movie. This movie went the complete other way. It told the viewers like, yeah, if these guys don't succeed, like the galaxy's going to explode. But then it was just like a hysterical tale of like misfits kind of roasting each other as they bumble through multiple like failed attempts to be heroes.
Mm-hmm.
It's truly like one of the best Marvel movies out of all of them, and it doesn't have a single household like superhero name in it. Like there's no Spider-Man, there's no Captain America. Like I had no idea who Star-Lord was. It's nonstop fun from start to finish, and one of the examples that cracks me up is the opening scene with Chris Pratt's character and Djimon's character. Djimon is like a classic supervillain where it's like, oh, he's superhuman strength, stamina, durability, and he looks like military essentially. You know, he's got the look, the aggressive, stern, no joking around, all these henchmen. And he arrests Chris Pratt, and Chris Pratt's trying to like explain and talk his way out of being arrested. And he's like, well, you know, you might recognize me by my nickname. And he's like, people call me Star-Lord. And the way Djimon hits him with like such a condescending, like, who is so like it takes the seriousness out of the situation completely. And Pratt's like embarrassed. He's like, come on, man, like Star-Lord, yo. Come on, man. And it really sets the tone for the movie that it's serious but still funny, and that plays out throughout the entire movie. I was happy to rewatch it for this podcast, and Djimon, I think, is great for playing the serious, stern tone, but the one-liners they give him to just like take the piss out of Chris Pratt's character is hysterical.
And one of the best soundtracks of any movie ever.
Oh, no question. No question.
James Gunn said he already selected the soundtrack for the next one.
I really wish in this one, with his role of Korath, I wish they hit more on like what his powers were. And they touch on it a little bit in like Captain Marvel, but he's still got such a minimal role. But he's got the ability to like track people, and with his like psionic powers. So his name is Korath the Pursuer, which makes sense for him to be like a bounty hunter. Mm-hmm. And I wish they kind of talked about him a little bit more, because I think him, along with Ronan, who keeps like popping up, I know it'll come up eventually in the future show, but you know, they could definitely have gone in a little bit more on him. I would have loved to see him in this a little bit more. 2014
to 2017, he's in the Seventh Son as Radu. As we kind of continue down the path here, he entered the Fast and the Furious universe in Furious 7. I mean, have you made it in Hollywood if you haven't been in a Fast and Furious movie? Some would say. I don't know.
It's easier to probably just work backwards. It's like, who hasn't been in any of these movies at this point?
I feel like if you have a body fat index less than like 5%, you should be Fast and the Furious movies.
100%.
And I think it speaks to his box office success, is that he's in a ton of Marvel and DC projects, and he's in the Furious side, which are big money-making projects, right? Mm-hmm. He's in the Vatican Tapes, Air, The Legend of Tarzan. He's in Season 2 of Wayward Pines. And he's in King Arthur, Legend of the Sword as Bedivere. All of that takes us to 2017, where he is in a movie called Same Kind of Different as Me that is currently available on Netflix. And Kay says this one.
I have never heard of this movie before this podcast. So it was one of those movies, or one of those projects that I'm fond of this podcast, because we get to learn about some stuff that, you know, we're never exposed to before. The Same Kind of Different as Me is based on the inspiring true story of international art dealer Ron Hall, who's played by Greg Kinnear. Ron Hall is actually who wrote this story and the screenplay, and it was a book that was published in 2006 and was a New York Times bestseller. In the movie, Ron Hall and his wife Debbie, played by Renee Zellweger, who, by the way, I had no idea that was Renee Zellweger until I looked it up on IMDb.
Yeah.
Ron and Debbie begin having marital problems. In order to save their marriage, he agrees to work with Debbie at this homeless shelter in Fort Worth, Texas. It's there where we meet Denver Moore, played by Djimon Hounsou. Denver is a violent, unstable, and dangerous member of the mission community, and everyone there is afraid of him, except for Debbie. You know, at this point of the movie, you guys, I was really concerned that it was going to be that you know, just cliche
white savior mentality.
Yeah, and you know, and just, oh, that lady's nice to me, so now I'm going to change as a person. I was really pleased how this movie went. Debbie had been seeing Denver in her dreams, and then she begins the process of creating a relationship with him and her family. Kinnear's character, he's not big on it. And this is where I thought this movie did a really good job. He was really comfortable working at the homeless shelter, but he didn't want that brought home. You know, a lot of times in these movies, it's just, you know, they have that one spark of they feel good working at the homeless shelter, and then it's just all in. I thought they did a really good job of portraying that. If anybody has ever seen The Shack, it kind of reminded me of that. It had that tempo and that feel. I really like this movie. I like these types of movies. It's got a great cast. You know, you got 2 Oscar winners in Zellweger and Voight, and then 2 Oscar nominees in Kinnear and Hounsou. There's a huge gap. Fan rating on this is 86, and the critic is 40. And I get that gap 100%. You know, I think the critics are looking at that movie, and rightfully so, saying, hey, you know what? I've seen this movie 1,000 times. And then conversely, people went to see this movie because they loved the book. And then it just kind of groundswelled from there. So I'm going to side on the fans in this one and say I really enjoyed this movie. And this movie would be drastically better on the second viewing of it, because one of the things that is tough in this movie is Hounsou's portrayal of Denver Moore. It's an odd accent, and he's hard to understand sometimes. But then at the end of the movie, we see an actual clip of the real Denver Moore talking.
Sounds a lot like him.
It clicks. It immediately clicks, and you're like, you know, I wish they'd have started with that and said, hey, this is who you're about to learn. And that was my only, you know, criticism of the movie.
I'm not going to give it as high as you did. I probably live in the 50, 55 range. Because it's a true story, it redeemed itself in ways for me. If it wasn't a true story, I would be down in the 40 range, personally. I just felt it was extremely corny.
Yeah, it's got some corny moments in there. The thing that I liked about the corny moments, though, is they were really isolated with Zellweger and Kinnear.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was a really small part of the story.
Although it's focused heavily on Djimon and Kinnear and their back and forth, well, and Renee Zellweger, I felt like they finished on the tone of John Voight and Kinnear, this father-son relationship. Like that's the last point they wanted to make, that we all need to let bygones be bygones and love our family no matter how ridiculously idiotic they can be. So between 2018 2019, he was an Aquaman and a bunch of CGI, and he was in the 2019 classic Serenity as Duke. Now, I have a feeling we're going to have some opinions on this one.
In fairness to the movie, I knew of the twist, of the absurd twist, prior to watching this. And so I'm watching this movie knowing that that's coming. And I was still shocked by how jarring the twist was and when it occurred and how little plot development took place prior to that. This movie came across to me like whoever the writer of it had the idea and wrote it down in like a cocktail napkin. It's like, isn't this a cool idea? And the production company the next day was like, yeah, we should film that tomorrow. Like, there's none of the characters are like fleshed out. The storyline's not fleshed out. Like, if you were to hear the entire plot, you'd be like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then when you see the movie, you're like, no, it's not. Like, it could have been. It's terrible.
And there's some good actors in there too. I mean, it's
very good actors.
If you told me there was a movie with this cast, and you would have been like, you can bet whether or not it's going to be plus, over 50 on the rating, I would have bet the house with this cast.
Yeah,
the top 6 build are incredible.
Like, I remember, I knew how did this get made was talking about it, and I listened to the first 5 minutes of the episode. I was like, shit, I got to go watch this movie, and I watched it. I was just absolutely baffled, just completely floored with how dumb that, like you said, James, somebody was like, oh yeah, this sounds like a great idea. It's just like, Jesus.
Like, it could have been, but if you made a movie about it, you didn't make a movie about it. You just like filmed what people think is a movie, and there's no like character development, but it's on purpose, I guess. Like, it's not that smart. When the movie ended, I genuinely asked myself, like, what was the point of Diane Lane's character? Like, was she just someone for Matthew McConaughey to have sex with?
Guys, the concept has balls. Like, it's a ballsy premise, but it is so batshit that by the end you're just like, no, and it's justifiably rated low. Was this a M. Night Shyamalan project? Like, what the fuck is going on?
Even M. Night probably saw this and was like, wow, that twist sucks.
That's saying a lot.
So just look at Matthew McConaughey's character name. His name was Baker Dill. Like, how dumb is that?
No one's ever been named that, ever.
So the largest critic gap was supposed to be Captain Marvel. Said 2019. Very small role, but again, he's like Gemma Chan, doing some other crossover projects on that one. So just in the past year and a half, he's been in 2 other projects. One, he was in Shazam as the Wizard, which is a pretty pivotal role for that story. And I think Shazam overall was received pretty well.
Yeah, I like Shazam a lot. It's a superhero I've never heard of. And so having an origin story like that, I thought was super fascinating. It was cool to see. And it was the first good DC movie that had come out in a while. I think it was like that and Wonder Woman were the only 2 that had some critical success.
I think Djimon does the Wizard pretty well. Does it justice, right? That's what you're searching for. Exactly.
like the fish. Yeah.
James, you brought it up earlier during trivia, and I know, Warren, you're big on superhero movies. Is he one of the biggest actors that's in both franchises?
No, so I looked it up. There's actually a ton that are in both franchises. The biggest one's Ben Affleck. We got Batman and Daredevil.
Oh, yeah.
Halle Berry, Josh Brolin.
Yeah, most of them are in shit dick movies.
Yeah.
I don't know why that made me laugh as much as it did. Thank you, Warren. And he was in the remake of Charlie's Angels in 2019. Rigby, do you have some top performances for us?
I was able to track down a list. It's a shorter list this time.
We like that.
So it's 6 performances from the Film Magazine. It's an article from 2015. The ones we just talked about, the last 5 or so, aren't included in this, but I probably think they would be included anyway, if I'm being honest, just from his filmography.
All the way to Furious 7, essentially.
3 of them are honorable mentions. So see if you want to guess those. So what of his 6 performances that are career-defining, guess which 3 are honorable mentions before we get to the top 3?
Never Back Down.
No.
Gladiator.
Gladiator is an honorable mention.
Constantine?
Nope.
Biker Boys.
One of the films listed is one that we reviewed tonight.
Serenity.
Nope.
Special Forces? I don't know.
No.
Amistad?
Nope.
Guardians
of the Galaxy?
Yeah.
Okay.
In there.
Oh, nice.
There was one more honorable mention, and I think we shit on it earlier.
Did, huh?
The Island?
The Island, yes.
Classic Michael Bay.
He's decent in that, man. So the top 3 are definitely Amistad, In America, and Blood Diamond. We're going to guess.
See if you can guess the order of those.
Amistad's got to be 1.
No, Amistad is number 3.
No, what is it?
Wow.
Blood Diamond number 1.
Blood Diamond number 1.
Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
And In America is number 2. Based off his Oscar nominations, I think that's a really good list.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, you got the Golden Globe for Amistad. Those would be the top 3. Well, let's get into some Munson meter ratings. If you're a first-time listener, the way we do this is we rate them on a scale of 1 to 100 based on a number of factors. We look at their longevity, how long they've been in the game. We evaluate their pop culture impact. So are they a household name? We look at their range as an actor. Are they a character actor? Are they filled a number of different types of roles? We look at their awards impact. We evaluate if they have any other talents. Do they sing, produce, direct, speak other languages, whatever those things happen to be. We evaluate them on their personal life, whether they're a great person or a huge piece of shit. So we'll go ahead and get started with Rigby.
There's a lot of movies that I've seen of him that I either didn't remember his character very well and I had to rewatch, and then his performance really stood out to me, or I just wasn't able to watch some of the movies that we mentioned tonight. For some of the movies that we mentioned tonight, The Serenities, The Island, those are movies I haven't seen, and for what it sounds like, I'm kind of glad I haven't seen, because those are movies that are not really looked very well upon. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he's only the second person that we've covered that has 2 Oscar nominations. Is that right? I think it's him and Lithgow.
I think that's correct, yes.
Unless Watanabe has 2. I can't recall that.
No, we only have 1.
That is a huge thing in itself. Where he came from on the streets of France as a homeless guy who was discovered can speak 5 languages. I think he's incredibly talented. The thing about this podcast is we review a lot of actors that I don't think really have good range.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably wouldn't have said that if I hadn't watched In America. So I was fortunate enough to watch In America, and I think his range was surpassed what I expected of him, for sure. So with that being said, I'm going to give him a 78. And that is I think a fair score for him because he doesn't really have a big filmography. I just wish he would have been in a little bit more movies from the last 10 years or so that I could comment on. So that's the only thing keeping me from giving him above an 80.
All right. Case.
Yeah, I agree with Rigby. He's got an interesting range for me when I'm watching his movies because he's in most roles he's kind of playing that real tough and stoic character, but yet he's got a really good ability to kind of melt the tension with this out of nowhere smile or laugh or grin. And I always enjoy almost every movie I've seen him in, and that's one of my favorite things to evaluate on actors. I like any actor that's come from a really tough beginning and grinded out a really big career about themselves. A couple of things that I'm going to be critical of in evaluating him is he hasn't had any really successful movies where he was the leading man and he was the guy. He was the main character. I would like to see him be the driving force behind a good movie in the lead role. And then the other thing, while I love his ability to be that tough guy who just out of the blue, melts the tension with a smile. I see him in so many roles where he's the same character, and I'd like to see that again. And I think that goes into being a leading man. I'd like to see that branched out a little bit, but I'm going to give him a 67.
You guys hit on a few things. I will say this. I think he's a bona fide supporting action star. You put him in an action series as a supporting actor, he's going to immediately upgrade your project. He's got those kind of chops. His background's impressive. He was the 8th black actor to receive an Oscar nom, so he's a jet setter in ways. He seems like a pretty good dude with some of his humanitarian work, climate change activist. I'm going to give him a little bit of a knock that he married Russell Simmons' ex-wife, and that was a lot of they split and he was dealing with a bunch of negative TMZ type press. I don't think he has the pop culture impact he could. And part of that is just because of how complicated his name is. And people, when you mention him, they're like, "Oh yeah, I like him," but most people can't pronounce his name, and that sucks. But it kind of is what it is. I was surprised to hear his star meter was higher than I probably thought it was. But he's a good actor. But to the point, Elephant White is the one I would point out where he was the lead, and it was a very uninspiring performance. I stopped paying attention many times, and a lot of it was because of he wasn't captivating. So with all that said, I'm going to give him a 69.
Nice.
Warren?
I'm going to go against what Kyle said with the bona fide action star. I actually think his best roles are in more of that drama, so more of the In America and in Amistad, where it is more of a character driven because he's got that range of emotion. Like you guys were saying, in like Blood Diamond, he was like that grounding force in a action film, and so I think that's where he's most needed. I think if this was 2009 and we were doing this, he would have like a star meter out the ass. He would be. Yep. Let's see. I couldn't believe how old he was. He's like 52.
56,
man. 56. So he would have been 45 in 2009 with 2 Oscar noms and all these awesome movies under his belt. We would have just said, like, man, the sky's the limit. He hadn't done any fucking shit bombs at this time. Whatever, suck bombs, whatever cases, whatever he said. The bomberoos. That one's, yeah. Hadn't done any of those yet. And so I think something clicked. He had enough clout at that time where they could just throw his name in there. And I think that they were just kind of like throwing his name in these movies. And before you knew it, Idris Elba had passed him. He had come on the scene and became that guy. Like, I honestly believe that in like the Marvel universe, if Idris Elba's not around, you got Heimdall has been played by Djimon Hounsou, a much more notable role. He probably has stuff in, Fast and Furious and more of those roles and more of those movies than just, his role number 7. I really think he could come up with something pretty awesome in the future, but he isn't that lead role like everybody's saying. I completely agree with that, but half the people that we've done haven't really been leading role either.
That's true.
You really have to have those people Hey, Allison Janney, she's an incredible example of that, supporting actress that she absolutely kills it. So I hope something comes around. I hope something clicks and some upcoming stuff, because he's a fascinating person. His accent and everything is, captivating. And so I'm going to give him a 70, just because I'm still kind of holding out a little bit on the future, and I really think the early part in his career, if it weren't for watching Amistad, I'd probably be considerably lower, but I think I enjoyed that so much. I'm going to have to give him a 70.
James, round us out, man.
Kyle, you mentioned it about him being, one of 8 black actors to ever be nominated for...
At the time. He was the 8th at the time.
So he's actually also one of 4 actors of African descent of the continent to ever receive an Oscar nomination. The only one who's ever been nominated twice, so that's a big feather in the cap. Been in the game for 20 years. I agree he's tapered off recently. And Warren, I think to a point about what happened around like the 2009 time, that is around the time that he had his son. So he has a 10-year-old son. And so taking time off to, throw your name in a couple blockbusters here and there while you're raising your kid is not something I'm going to knock him for, right? Like,
sure,
life happens. He's been in blockbusters, but also really successful dramas. So Warren, I totally agree with you there as well. I think that is his strength, is in dramas. I'm excited to see him potentially get back into that. But the thing that I give him the highest score for is he's just a genuinely good dude, and he's got an inspiring life story. So when he was at the peak of his fame after being nominated for 2 Academy Awards, he used that fame to, put his name on causes he believes in, like Kyle mentioned, like climate change, fighting extreme poverty in Africa. He also spoke to Congress and was one of the driving forces that actually approved $150 million in additional funding for runaway and homeless youth programs in the U.S. And that was in 2009. So, like, at his peak, he was using that for good. And that's something I could always respect. I do agree with you guys, though. He hasn't had many leading roles, and he hasn't taken home many of those awards. He was nominated. Other than that, I think he's the man, and I swear to God, I did not change the score. I am going to give him a 78.
All right, Warren, what kind of average are we looking at?
That gives Djimon Hounsou a 72.4, which puts him at 5th. He is behind Ken Watanabe and ahead of Chris Pratt.
All right, Warren, tell us a little bit about his upcoming projects.
There's some stuff pushed back coming out this year. So we had him in A Quiet Place Part 2. And The King's Man, so part 3 of the Kingsman movies, which is actually like a prequel to the entire thing. And then he's doing the voice for Korath in Marvel animated TV series What If, and then doing another voice, so more of that voice work, Blazing Samurai. Another animated movie is supposed to come out in 2021, which is taking kind of a fun spin on Blazing Saddles somehow. So
get out of here.
We'll see what happens.
Wow. That's a tricky movie to release these days.
In 2020.
And it is Samuel L. Jackson, Ricky Gervais, Michael Cera, Mel Brooks, Djimon, George Takei. So
I have a lot more excitement for it then.
I hope they hit all the same jokes that they did back in like 72 when Blazing Saddles came out.
Yeah.
Because that'll land really well.
Yeah.
The internet will blow up immediately. All righty. So we've got some actors for consideration on the next episode. The 5 we're looking at that we will put on the wheel are James Spader, Rooney Mara, Natasha Lyonne, Ed Harris, and Anthony Mackie. Fellas, what are our thoughts?
Anyone but Natasha Lyonne.
I think Ed Harris is the star of that group, but I'd be happy with any of the others.
I would agree.
I don't really want to do Natasha Lyonne just because I don't really know a lot of her film roles, if I'm being honest.
Not trying to watch American Pie and American Pie 2. But
she's done a lot of TV work.
Yeah, I love Russian Doll, but that's, we don't really do
Orange
that,
is the New Black.
Yeah. We've got a couple Marvel actors on there, and Spader and Mackie.
Rooney Mara would be
pretty good.
Watch Carol.
Carol's great. I love Carol.
Ghost Story. She's good in that.
I love Side Effects, too. That's a great movie.
Yeah, Side Effects tripped me out.
Social Network and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah, she's been in a lot of good projects. I'd be cool with all of them. Anthony Mackie would be fun. He's got some older projects that We can watch 8 Mile.
I was going to say, give me an excuse to watch 8 Mile.
Yeah.
He's in the hate you give.
We will spin the wheel. And as always, the wheel will decide.
Wheel decides.
So our next podcast is going to hit on July 2nd. Our guest is going to be Corey Wallace. She works full-time in the design world. She works in new business development, Rhyme and Reason Design. She's worked in higher ed for a number of years. She's this big movie nerd. She'll be excited to get on here and chop it up and talk an actor, whoever that actor happens to be. So as we wrap this thing up, as always, you can find us on Twitter at Munson's at Movies. You can catch us on Instagram at Munson's at the Movies. You can find us on email at munsonsatthemovies@gmail.com. As always, we love to see you interacting with our posts online. Trivia, we've been popping more daily Instagram trivia questions about actors. If you can name their roles, we tend to create them to be pretty difficult because, you could say Djimon is his character in Guardians of the Galaxy, but that's a gimme, so we're going to dig into some deep cuts. Any final thoughts?
I have to say, I am impressed. I would very much like to know the name of the man who is causing me so much trouble.
The Munsons?
Who?
Oh, come on, man. The Munsons. Munsons out.
All right, let's go. Thank you for the education, gentlemen. We've just received a PhD in stupidity. Doctor, shall we?